Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm your host, Adam Morrissey. Today I'm excited to be joined by Ross Chaifetz. Ross is a principal at Chaifetz Group, a private investment firm and venture capital firm out of Chicago behind companies like Cameo, Capsule, ComPsych, and most recently, the St. Louis Shock Major League Pickleball team. Really excited to have a conversation about the business of pickleball. So thanks for joining, Ross. How are you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me, Adam. Good to be back with you.
Yeah, totally, man. Well, congrats on the St. Louis Shock. On January 19th, it was announced that the newest pickleball team would be the Shock. And then if my dates are right, I think a week later, you're out in Mesa, Arizona, supporting the team. Talk a little bit about what went on behind the scenes, behind the launch of the team.
Yeah, it was an absolute whirlwind, for lack of a better term. I mean, to give you a sense for what happened leading up to us being awarded the team, we've had our eye on MLP, Major League Pickleball, for probably 6 months before the deal was done, dating back to June or July of 2022. We'd kept our eye on the continual announcements of new ownership groups, celebrities, billionaires, actors, et cetera. And we were like, gosh, there's some big names behind this thing, and the growth of pickleball is phenomenal. We got to keep our eye on this. So, we had been in the touch with the league over a series of months, and they were kind of giving us the runaround, saying, hey, we're getting hit up by new groups every day. Everybody wants one of these things, stay put. And kept checking in, trying to be as persistent as possible. And they reached out to us the day after New Year's. I want to say it was January 2nd. With like a 2 or 3 paragraph email that essentially said, we're awarding 2 new teams, put your best foot forward. We need bid letters in 3 days. And here's what your bid letters should contain. And it was, X, Y, and Z. Who are you? Why do you want to do this? What are you willing to pay? What's the synergies and sort of strategic overlap that you bring to the table? So we put our best foot forward, pitching ourselves as a family, as an investment firm, and as operators. But what was unique about us is the component we brought to the table around the St. Louis market. It's a market that we spent a lot of time in. We've made all sorts of investments, philanthropic, around St. Louis University and their athletics program, but a lot of venture and growth equity investments, real estate. So top to bottom, we were pretty involved in the environment and the community, and we felt it was something they would really be willing to rally around. So put our best foot forward around us personally in the market as well. And there were 82 bidders, and they narrowed it down to us and the DeVos family out of Orlando, who own the Orlando Magic, and us and they got the final 2 teams. So following submission of our bid letter, we were awarded the team, I think, within 3 or 4 days. So it went from, hey, there's 2 new teams to, hey, you've won the franchise in a period of about a week. And then to pick up the point at which you asked the question, we rewarded the team and they basically said 7 days, we're live in Mesa. And so we were getting bombarded with everything from, the league, sponsorships, our team, everything in between. And, pickleball is a game that's relatively easy to pick up as an amateur or as a rec player, but the professional game is a whole different ball game. So, I was literally up until 1 or 2 a.m. every single night leading up to Mesa, watching every single past tournament I could get my hands and my eyes on just to understand the game at the professional level. Because again, it's so different. But things move fast. I was sprinting, man. I was on LinkedIn. I was on Twitter. I'm like, I need a graphic designer. I'm working behind the scenes to come up with our logo. I'm getting in touch with my team. So things were moving really, really quick. But, the point at which we got to Mesa, we were able to take a little bit of a deep breath because the league just did such a phenomenal job putting on the event. It was really, really an exciting event out there in Mesa, 3 or 4 days of the tournament. Everything went as smooth as possible. But that's kind of the quick backdrop. It moved extremely quickly, but we were well positioned to be able to capitalize, and we're really excited about it.
It's a lot to be excited about, man. Was there a draft included in there also?
So there was, but what was unique is, so the MLP they have a traditional snake-style draft format, but they had actually drafted the players for our team, now the Shock, in sort of a ghost team format because their draft takes place middle of December. So they did their draft in Vegas December 15th, and they had somebody representing this sort of ghost team that we inherited or acquired, but there wasn't a GM representing our team really selecting the player. So our team was drafted, and fortunately we got some really, really good players, but they were assigned to us, not chosen by us. And that was, unique to us and the New Orlando team. The other 22 teams, had a very hands-on approach to hand selecting their players in the draft. But, the MLP does redraft at least once a year. So we'll have an opportunity to sort of get our hands on the construction of the team moving forward. But it was definitely a unique format, absorbing or inheriting a team versus hand selecting one.
Yeah, for sure. And like these guys that were ghost drafted, what were they doing before?
So you mean in terms of their backgrounds or waiting for our team to be announced?
Kind of both. Like, are they full? Like, are they tennis converts? Like, do they have jobs in the working world?
So what's interesting is, to answer your question, yes, MLP professionals are not full-time salaried by the league. They're paid essentially what's considered an appearance fee. So they're essentially contractors. They show up to each event. They're paid to participate in the event, but they're incented by the grand prizes at each event and then ultimately at the end of the season. Their backgrounds, most players come from a tennis or similar, racket style sport background, which, you could imagine. Folks who either were tennis professionals or tennis coaches and transitioned to the game of pickleball. But there's, a couple interesting MLP players who didn't come from tennis backgrounds. Some of them, believe it or not, were boxers. There's a lot of hand-eye coordination that goes into the game of pickle. It's more important to be quick with your eyes and your hands than it is with your feet. So there's a couple players that came from boxing backgrounds. Surprisingly, a couple were skiers and snowboarders. So there's a little bit of everything. I would say probably half the league is what we would consider to be full-time pickleball players, where they're playing not just for MLP, but doing, pickle APA endorsed tournaments. The other half has, kind of full-time day jobs working for tennis companies, racket companies, or everything in between, and then making, appearances for MLP along the way.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Some stats for listeners. In 2021, there was about 5 million people playing pickleball. And up until recently, like I remember hearing my dad play it, but I didn't actually know what it was or what it looked like. And then in 2022, it was up to 37 million. Like, what is it, Ross, that you think makes pickleball so special from like an amateur playing or watching professionals play?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And like everybody thinks that pickleball, was born over the last couple of years. And it's not that it was birthed over the last couple of years, it's that it reemerged over the last couple of years. The game actually dates back to the 1960s, and there's a long history that I won't bore you with. But it was the pandemic that really facilitated the reemergence of this game, because people were locked in their house with families of all ages, kids as young as 4, 5 years old, teenagers, adults, grandparents, and everything in between. And they were looking for a sport that's cheap, easy to play, accessible, can be played literally in your backyard, in your basement, at a public park, or anything in between. And so, in 2021, the phenomenon of pickleball really exploded in terms of interest in the sport. But what they were lacking was the ability to actually play the game. There wasn't a prominence of courts yet. So people were kind of playing more unofficially in their backyard, in their basement, as I mentioned, but there were no courts in the neighborhood. And what happened was in 2022, the opportunities to play caught up with the demand. So local municipalities were converting their tennis courts, realizing nobody wanted to play tennis. People wanted to play pickle. And what they liked about it is you can actually fit 4 pickleball courts into the rectangular dynamic that a tennis court would fill. So it allowed for 8 people to be playing on a given court, or even more, versus just 4 in a traditional tennis format. So it's really the investment of municipalities all across the country, officially endorsed sort of pickleball facilities, that helped grow the game from 5 million to 35 or 40 million in that 12-month span. It's interesting, just to come back to your question about like who is the ideal pickle player. What we love so much about this opportunity is that there isn't one. It truly transcends age. It transcends athletic ability. 4-year-olds can play, 100-year-olds can play. And that's what's so magic about the game. It's really easy to pick up, but it's incredibly difficult to become a truly phenomenal player.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just played for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and the first time, and I played a lot of tennis in the last couple of years, and first time I was playing like in a live match, I was like smiling ear to ear, like, okay, I get it. Yeah, that's pretty interesting on the urban planning side. I remember when COVID happened, you just couldn't get on a tennis court. Right. So now if you have swarm pickleball courts, but there's actually a set amount of time that everyone plays, it's much more orderly and faster moving, like more people can play. You mentioned that there isn't an ideal pickleball player. Like, what do you think that means for the future St. Louis Shock players? Like, the other week I had a special advisor to the president of the LA Dodgers on talking about data in sports. Like, how do you see data playing into Major League Pickleball players? Are we going to see, I don't know, grocery cart guys got pretty quick feet? Are we going to see some pretty crazy stuff out there?
You're going to see a little bit of everything. And what's interesting is there's a player on our team by the name of Simone Jardim, who's widely regarded as the best player of all time. She, I believe, just turned 41, but she is truly the number one player ever. She won 4 single U.S. Open pickleball tournaments between 2016 and 2020. So she's widely regarded as one of the best players ever. But some of the younger players are starting to really surpass at a very quick speed some of the traditional professionals. So right now, the number one player in the world is a girl by the name of Anna Leigh Waters, and she just turned 16. She's been playing for 2.5 years. So when you think about the opportunity for somebody as young as, quite literally middle school to be competing with the best players in the world, that opens the floodgates to the types of people that can compete in this sport. When you think about the longevity of an athlete in the NFL or the NBA, you have a very finite period of which you can be at the top of your game. It's age 18 or 20 up to, 30 to 34. Tom Brady might argue with that. But, the point is there's a finite period of time. And when you look at the MLP, there are players, as I mentioned, as young as 15, quite literally the best in the world, and up to 40s and even into their 50s. So it creates a wide opportunity for multiple levels of players to be competitive, again, at the highest level possible. And we think about what is the selection process? How do you identify those best players in the world? There's a formal ranking system called DUPR, D-U-P-R, which tracks and accounts for every single tournament or every single match that a player participates in. So it transcends the league, it transcends, the region or the country that players are competing in. And it's becoming this uniform data tracking suite to be able to evaluate players. The league itself is investing in, and soon to announce here, all sorts of data capabilities, betting capabilities, et cetera. The beauty of being a startup that's less than 2 years old, a startup league, is we can be incredibly agile around all these efforts versus an NFL or an NBA or an MLB who's been around for 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 years. They have the money to spend and the people to hire to focus on these things, but they are very slow moving in terms of interrupting their existing processes. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about MLP is their ability to be nimble around data and some of the other ideas that we just talked about here.
It's super cool, man. You mentioned Tom Brady, and some celebrities around the league, Tom Brady's part of an ownership group. Gary Vee's part of an ownership group. Kevin Durant, all of these people have invested in some ownership groups. What do you think that means for the future of the sport?
Yeah, really incredible names. I mean, you've got traditional sport owners like Mark Cuban, Mark Lazary, NBA owners, multi-billionaires. You've got Kevin Durant, you've got Tom Brady, Larry Fitzgerald, you've got Kygo, Naomi Osaka, Heidi Klum. It's truly incredible. What that means for the game is that some of the best players in the world, some of the best actors, some of the best business professionals in the world have endorsed this sport. And they're investing because they've played it themselves and they realize how exciting and how fun it can be. And again, the fact that it can transcend any demographic, any age. So they're all in from that perspective. But it brings us a huge advantage in terms of how we brand and how we go to market. Because if you think about, the following of just one single LeBron James, and now multiply that by hundreds, if not thousands, when you think about the social following of everybody that we just listed. It means that we can announce a tournament and have quite literally 3 billion eyeballs on that announcement of that tournament overnight. That's really our most powerful marketing and branding engine. And it brings such a unique lens to the league and to the sport.
Yeah, I mean, social media and Major League Pickleball is just a match made in heaven. So yeah, the eyeballs and the influencers around the sport is huge. It's a little different than a lot of the other sport formats. Most of them are couple-hour games and played in specific cities. Like, how do you think? And there's a couple other major league sports like lacrosse, like Major League Lacrosse bounces around, and I think they do tournament-style formats. Like, how do you think some of these tournament-style sports can compete with longer kind of single-game sports?
It's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked it because the MLP has thought a lot about what is the best, game or match style format for MLP as a startup league. we in the league did a lot of research around this, and actually the average American viewer prefers tournament style format over any other gameplay format. And if you think about it, every other league, generally speaking, in the world incorporates it today. You just might not think about it as tournament style format. The NFL, the NBA, World Cup, NHL, you name it. You've got their regular season format, but at the end of the day, everything comes down to tournament style format. And it's extremely competitive. And what's beautiful about tournament style format, and March Madness is a prime example of this, anybody can beat anybody, right? And when you think about, what that means for the sport, it's incredibly exciting. Pickleball has more parity, I would argue, than just about any other sport in the world. And again, any team can beat any other team, whoever they're across from. A pair of 15-year-olds can beat a pair of 30-year-olds. A pair of 50-year-olds can beat a pair of 20-year-olds. So it means that the game is really uber exciting to watch. The tournament style is one that, we validated with our broadcast partner, the Tennis Channel. They're incredibly excited about it. They're familiar with that style because of the game of tennis. And so it's something that I really don't anticipate us moving away from, at least in the short term. And we validate it from the fans and the players. Everybody seems to really love it.
I mean, the games are short, right?
So relatively speaking, so a game, when we say a game, meaning one team play or another, it's composed of up to five. I should say a match is composed of up to 5 games. Each game you're playing up to 21, but the score is frozen at 20. So win by 2 on the 20th point. What it means is that, you require 3 games to win to advance. You could win that in a series of 5, or you could, sweep the opposing team and win that in a series of 3. Each game itself is anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. So that means a match can range from about an hour to an hour and 45 minutes, dependent upon the scoring, dependent upon the competitiveness.
Yeah, super cool, man. I mean, are there, for these cities, like the St. Louis Shock, for instance, what does that mean for the actual city itself? Does that mean now it's on the circuit to host a weekend? Will St. Louis host pickleball games?
So here's how the league thinks about their cities and their teams. So generally speaking, players don't live in and compete in their home markets. Again, because we're drafting and redrafting every year, players are all around the country. We view teams and markets as a way to excite concentrated communities around the league. So it's each team's respective responsibility to brand themselves, market themselves, and engage their local community. So right now, we're not playing, at least on a scheduled basis, in each hometown's community. That being said, if you look at the tournament style format of the MLP, there's 6 tournaments per year. And generally speaking, they tour the country and compete in each of the markets that there is a home team. So for example, this year, our first tournament of the year was in Arizona. We'll now be in Daytona Beach. Then we go to California, Atlanta, and then we round out the season back in Newport Beach. So 6 tournaments per year, and they pre-select those sites in advance each year. The objective is to bring a tournament to each host team, each host city, and sort of, again, snake style flow through all the cities to create engagement and create excitement in each community. At the local level, generally speaking, teams are doing a lot of community engagement activities like local tournaments, exhibitions with other regional teams. So we might compete with the Chicago Slice or the Columbus Bus, or we might have the Orlando Squeeze come up to town. You're laughing at the name.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, there's exhibitions, there's clinics, there's camps. You can do a little bit of anything you want in your community to engage your fan base. And then the league will actually tour through each of those cities in their tournament style format.
Yes, that's really interesting, man. So do you guys have I remember I have a friend who's in marketing at the NFL. And they track all the spend across all the teams, how many followers they each have, and they use that as an indication of the fan bases in the market. Do you guys have and you don't have to share what they are, but do you guys have growth goals around the market? Is that one of your responsibilities as an ownership group, is to grow that market?
Yeah, so we do that at the league level and at the local level. At the league level, the league has established a goal that owners are rallying around. We call it the 40 by 30 campaign, meaning 40 million active players by 2030. There are 40 million players today, but when you think about an occasional player versus a regular player. That's the target that we've established at the league level, that 40 by 30. So we're about 7 years out from there. We think it's achievable. It's a stretch, but it's achievable. But we need those goals to be able to rally around. At the local level, it's somewhat dependent upon your market and your operational setup, meaning a goal for the team in Columbus might look very different than a goal for the team in, let's call it California or Orlando or New York City, you name it. So the league does help and advise on how you think about those branding goals and those audience goals, but they're not formally established at the team level, more so at the league level. Each team is responsible for really hiring whoever they want and establishing their organization in terms of how you think about a GM, how you think about a COO, a president, a head of brand, head of content, head of marketing, social media, et cetera. So each team has their own objectives and their own strategies in terms of how they build their brand in their respective market.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it really just clicked for me around the fact that, it's one of the only sports that viewers can play. Right. So to look at it about participants are going to be most interested in watching the best, potentially even more interested in watching the best than people that don't play themselves, and anyone can play for any amount of time. That's fascinating. I mean, you talked a little bit about, social media. You talked a little bit about, the eyeballs on these tournaments. Can you speak a little bit more to kind of the marketing plan? We talked about growing the local markets, but how does that ultimately translate into a really valuable league?
Well, ultimately what it boils down to is viewership and engagement. We know that 40 million people played the game in the country over the last 12 months. Our challenge or our opportunity is converting those semi-regular players into viewers at the league level. And what's interesting is, when you play the game recreationally, your style of play is entirely different than what you'll see on TV when you see the best professionals in the world competing. If you and I were out on the court, Adam, we'd probably just be lobbying and volleying the ball back and forth.
Speak for yourself.
When you see professionals play, they are up at the kitchen line, and they're in, more likely than not, they're in what's called a firefight, where they're dueling back and forth, spiking the ball at one another at speeds of 70, 80 miles an hour. And when you're 6 or 8 feet away from your opponent, you have a quarter of a second to react to that. And so the gameplay as you see it on TV is much different than how you would play it in person. So our challenge is communicating to folks that, yes, we know you play this game. Yes, we know you love this game. Now come watch this game, right? And when we think about how that can translate into commercialization of the league, if you think about the NBA, the NHL, the MLB, you name it, the primary revenue driver for most of these leagues, and this has only emerged in the last 15 or 20 years, is broadcast rights. Most of these leagues are on multi-billion, if not tens of billions of dollar deals over fixed periods of time, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And then ultimately those proceeds trickle down to each of the teams and go pro rata. So our opportunity right now is building the audience as much as possible and converting people into regular viewers. Right now, we just signed a really exciting deal with the Tennis Channel, but it's a short-term deal, and that's by design. That's a short-term deal by design because we anticipate explosive growth of this thing over the next couple of years. And we want to be able to be in a position where we're not locked in, and we have the ability to renegotiate at any point, whether that's with a traditional broadcast partner, like a Tennis Channel, like an ESPN, or whether it's with an up-and-coming streaming service like an Amazon Prime or a YouTube, or even DraftKings is getting into the streaming game themselves. So again, it's coming back to our agility as a startup league is opening lots of doors for us and allowing us to be extremely creative as we think about the commercialization of the league here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, it seems like there's a big opportunity here, and it seems like it's getting less and less of a secret. Are there rival leagues? Maybe not necessarily rival leagues, and potentially it isn't even a bad thing to have more than one league, but I would be curious if there's other groups trying to build a similar professional circuit.
So there are rival, I won't call them rival, but there are tours that our players play on when they're not competing for MLP. But in those tour formats, they're typically competing, independently or as a pair. MLP is the only team-based format where teams are drafting players and then competing with those fixed players throughout the year. We're allowed to trade and do whatever we want, but we are unique in the sense that we are a team-based format. You asked if there were competing leagues or rivals. There were back in 2022. And what happened was The competing league was called the Vibe League, which was founded by Tom Dundon, who owns the Carolina Hurricanes and a couple other sports assets. He founded the Vibe League as a way to compete with MLP because he thought he could do it better. And he launched with, I want to say, 4 or 6 teams at the time at which MLP had 14 or 16. And they were competing with one another for players because they were attempting to lock their players up in exclusivity so that they wouldn't go cross-league because everybody wanted the best players possible. What they realized was that exclusivity was hurting the game because fans had to choose, do I want to watch MLP, do I want to watch Vibe, or do I want to watch something else? So what happened was there was a little bit of a truce at the end of 2022 where MLP agreed to acquire or merge with Vibe. And interestingly enough, tying back to your original question, that's what sparked the opportunity for us to acquire our team. Because MLP acquired this league and absorbed these sort of ghost teams that had, brands established, but they had these teams that were sort of unaccounted for in terms of their ownership. So when MLP absorbed those teams, that's when they went to market and they announced 4 new teams in December, right around that draft period, and then the final 2, which went to us and the DeVosses. So there were competing leagues, but they have begun to consolidate now, which we believe is really good for the game.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I'll definitely be keeping my eyes out on the local pickleball courts. I imagine we'll start seeing the city logos pop up pretty quickly and people repping city gear. Chaifetz Group's invested in all sorts of different, assets from healthcare to technology to real estate. How is the diligence? Didn't sound like you have much time, but how is the diligence on something like this different than a venture investment?
That's a great question. In some ways it's similar, in some ways it's different. I mean, in a lot of ways this could be considered a venture investment.
Yeah,
when you're making venture investments, you look at the diligence, and generally speaking, more often than not, there are certain clear signs you can point to in diligence and certain things that you just got to roll with your gut on. So, sometimes that can be team, sometimes that can be financials, sometimes that could be TAM, market, whatever it may be. And in this case, in pickleball, we had no questions about the TAM. We had no questions about the audience because the statistics were right in front of us. What our diligence came down to was, do we believe that our entry point leaves us enough growth that we can essentially capture a return over time? And, what this came down to for us was, we knew the league had secured the top players. We knew the league had incredible management at the executive level, ex-Goldman bankers, ex-heads of the U.S. tennis tour, some of the best marketers, ex-Coca-Cola, ex-Google, et cetera. So it wasn't a question of team or players for us. Our question was, and this ties back to an earlier question that you asked, was around commercialization. Can they secure the broadcast agreements? Can they secure the sponsorship agreements that they need to bring in the revenue? There was revenue that existed, but that was our biggest question mark, is how do you translate this into monetization? Fortunately for us, just about the same time we signed our deal, the league announced an incredible set of new sponsors. I mentioned the Tennis Channel, but they have a big deal with Anheuser-Busch. They have a naming sponsor deal with Margaritaville, with Skechers, all the way down the line. So they are starting to prove our thesis on that front, which makes us very, very comfortable. Generally speaking, in most investments, there's going to be a question mark. And that's what it came down to for us, is can they really commercialize this thing?
Yeah, and it sounds like they're doing a great job too. And it sounds, I'll have to get to one of these tournaments someday, and because the pictures I saw just looked electric.
Yeah, you missed Austin. It was in Austin in the fourth quarter last year, but we'll get you to one soon.
All right, cool, man. Well, Ross, you spent a time in a variety of different industries. Any reading materials or content sources you'd recommend to listeners?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of how folks can keep up with pickleball. The first thing I would recommend is the Inside MLP podcast. It's facilitated by current and former pickle pros, and they're interviewing some of the best in the industry, from top players to the commissioner of the MLP to folks that work for tennis organizations, Skechers, all the way down the line. And they have a very, very good sort of inside track or inside lens as to what's happening at the MLP level. For folks who are interested in following pickleball more broadly and looking for maybe more recreational coverage, there's traditional outlets like USA Pickleball, the Duper blog. Duper is the ranking system I alluded to earlier. And generally speaking, it's easy to keep up with the league on their social outlets, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. There's a lot of content out there. That's one of the opportunities I would point to is I think there's going to be some big consolidation around pickleball content over the next couple of years, but the league does a really, really good job of getting themselves in front of their target audience.
Awesome, man. Well, really appreciate the time. I might have grew up in Columbus, Ohio and spent a lot of time in Dallas and Austin, but make no mistake, I'm a Shock fan. Thanks for joining the show, Ross.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Adam. Good to be with you.
Cheers.